I have a Al Curly come and share with us about marriage. Awesome. Come on up.
While we're getting set up, I have a handout, and there's pens scattered around too. So if you want to find there's extra handouts. Y'all are sitting in all kinds of configurations. Y'all figure it out. But I think you'll enjoy it if you get a handout.
There we go.
Now,
both mics on. You don't have to share. Look like a team.
That's right. All right, here we go. Here we go. So Martha, many of you have met Martha before. We've been married for 42 years. We're in our 42nd year. Yeah, something like that.
Somewhere around there, 40 something.
Yeah, I think got to do the math. It's 83. Right, we turned 42 in August. There we go. Okay, so August 15th, 1981.
But
there. That helped.
This month, we've been together for 45 years.
That's
We
right.
started dating in February of 1977.
We were high school sweethearts. I brought an object lesson to start out our program. My parents are here, and they've been married for 65.
Wow.
No, it's not. It's not that long, Mom. It just feels that long. Yeah, it just feels that long. So anyway, the reason I'm glad my parents are here is that they had a group of friends they were really close with back when I was born. And a lot of those couples divorced because everything changed about marriage back in the 60s and 70s. Before that, there was a lot of emphasis on fulfilling the role of husband and wife, of the social survival skills that were necessary. He had his roles, she had her roles, and so on and so forth. And everybody knew what those roles were. And then over the last 70 years, everything's changed. And the reason for getting married is because of companionship. That should sound familiar. My parents figured out how to be great companions. And so they stayed together. A lot of the friends that my parents had didn't figure that out. And so they really struggled with marriage. And the tools needed for a successful marriage in a companionship marriage are very different from the tools needed in a social survival kind of marriage. You need tools like forgiveness, sharing, sacrifice. And what Martha and I are going to talk about today is communication. These sheets have some very simple but very effective communication tools. My wife and I have test driven all of these, and we know they work. So if you use them, that's right. If you use them, you can't just look at them on a piece of paper. You got to use them. And so we wanted to highlight some of our favorite communication tools that have helped our marriage stay on course. And the very first one is the sharing of feelings. This is where a relationship builds a very intimate closeness, is when we can share feelings openly and honestly with one another. Oprah Winfrey had some psychological guru on once, and he says, the problem with marriage today is people share too many feelings. Then a couple of weeks later, she had another guru on and said, the problem is couples today just don't know how to share their feelings. All right, so I can help you with this. How many feelings are there? How many can you and I experience? I saw a sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, 4 columns, single space, 10-point font, full of human feelings. It was not complete. And usually when you ask your spouse, what are you feeling? Your spouse will say something like, well, I'm surprised, or I'm bored, or I can't believe we're doing this. And these are all what I call smoke screen feelings. They don't really tell our spouse anything about what we're doing, thinking, experiencing. They just keep our spouse at a distance. So I want to offer up that we have 4 main feelings. All the rest are some shade of or derivation of those 4. What are they? You look at your paper, you'll see them. Mad, sad, glad, and afraid. And so the tool Martha and I would use is we would call this a feeling statement, or I call it also the language of communication. I feel. If I start out with I feel, then my spouse has to consider that. She can't say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Feelings don't work that way. We feel because of the experiences that we're experiencing, and we can't just change those feelings. So we're being honest. And one of the neat things about I feel is a lot of the feelings that we have are maybe negative emotions toward our spouse, but we can't solve those unless we can honestly share those negative emotions with our spouse, and our spouse can help us. So for example, I feel mad, sad, glad, or afraid, and then I tell my spouse why. So I remember the first night that Martha and I first encountered this tool for communication, and we looked at each other and we said, this is a great tool for communication. The same night they said, the leader of the group said, there's no place for stings in a healthy marriage. And Martha looked at me and says, that's you. And I said, guilty as charged. I do. I'm a stinger. I've got a forked tongue. I can say terrible things to people. Fortunately, I don't think many of you have ever experienced that because I worked really hard at fixing myself. All right. And so I got in the car that night with Martha. We had a great time, laughed and so on. And I looked at the gas tank meter and it was laying on empty. And I looked over at her and I said, man, you bled every drop of gas out of the gas tank today, didn't you, sweetie?
She said, try again.
Yeah, that's right. She said, try again. Now I've been doing this to her for years, and and sometimes she would fire back, or sometimes she would start to defend herself, but I wouldn't be very nice. And so I sat there for a moment. Try again. All right. I feel mad when we get in the car and there's no gas in the gas tank. And she says, well, what can we do about it? And we realized that we had $5 the gas tank for 3 years. You'll know what I'm talking about, don't you? And you don't save any money that way. You just get in more fights. So we made an agreement that we would never $5 the gas tank again. If you get gas, fill it up. And we haven't thought about gas ever since. It works. We have used this tool all through our marriage, and it's been terrific. What Early's rule of romance is, if you start out a sentence with the phrase you are, you got to come up with the next word has to be you are so beautiful, you are so handsome, you are so witty, you are the best. You can't go you are a fool, you're an idiot, you know? Right? Don't go pointing.
But it doesn't.
That's right.
Yeah.
When you point fingers at your spouse and call them names, it doesn't help with communication. It doesn't build the intimacy that you're looking for. So that's what, you want to add anything to that? All right, the next tool, reflective listening. Now, this is a tool that Martha and I use all the time. Well, no, she uses it all the time because I need it. You tell your spouse what you think you heard them say.
And so I would be going on about something and he would answer, and it really didn't address what I was talking about. So I would say, hey, hon, what did I just say?
Huh.
And he would have to give back to me in his own words, a summary of what I just said. What happened?
It would look something like this. Well, you just said, I don't have a clue. Say it again. I'm listening now. Yeah.
Try again, is that what you're supposed to say?
Well, this is our agreement when we're working on a communication skill or a tool. Because it takes time to change habits, it's easy to fall back into old habits. So we have agreed to tell each other when we fall into the habit, whatever it is that we're working on, we'll just simply say, try again, or we'll have a code word or something that we use so that we give each other another chance to go, oh yeah, that's right, I'm supposed to be working on this. Okay, change my tone of voice. That's mine. I have to work on my tone of voice. So, but that's just permission with each other, and it's an important part of tools that you use.
Some of you that may recall certain arguments with spouse where you just feel like you're going around and around and around. And reflective listening can really help that, because often what's happening with reflective listening is you've really stopped listening to what your spouse says because you're just so brilliant, you already know. And your spouse is looking for a way to solve the problem. You're working on a way to solve the problem, and you're just not listening to each other. So this is a really great tool.
Reflective listening also helps the other person know that they've been heard. And that's a real important part of communication, is sometimes our frustration at repeating something over and over again, the same argument, is because we don't ever feel like we're heard. But when you have reflective listening, then the person who's been speaking, when that person reflects back what they said correctly or accurately enough, then that the other person feels like they've been heard, which is huge in stopping fights.
I was going to say, it seems like Martha and I, whenever we fight about different things at the same time.
Anybody else do that?
Yeah, and that's most of our arguments these days. And so it's not uncommon for me to say, well, what are you fighting about? Reflective listening. And she'll say, well, I'm fighting about this. I said, well, I agree with that. And she'll look at me and say, well, what are you fighting about? And I said, well, I'm fighting about this. I said, well, that's pretty smart too. And so the fight just vanishes because we're actually on the same page talking about the same thing. Okay. I've flown through the first two. Does anybody have any questions?
Why's it always your fault? I'm kidding.
Starting an argument.
Yes, Lee. I'm disappointed, Lee.
What I hear you saying, Lee, is that you haven't heard me take responsibility for things I've done wrong yet.
No, you're the one. Right again.
It's about
He says, try again. Clearly always Al's fault, right? Clearly, all right. So the next one is, don't use questions that begin with why. Why?
Why not?
Because.
Exactly. Exactly. Why not? Because if you ask your kid, why did you do this? Why did you hit little Susie in the face? And Johnny goes, I don't know. Or because, and you find out nothing. And the reason is why questions are not questions at all. They're statements, but they're kind of dishonest statements. What we usually mean is, Johnny, don't hit your little sister, or something like that. And so Martha and I have tried through the years to not ask the kids why questions, but questions more like, what did you want when you did that? What were you trying to accomplish? What did your sister do to you? Or stuff like that, where what, when, where questions are a whole lot more honest, and you get information, which is really, really helpful. One of the great things that a lot of times I'll be teaching this to premarital couples, and I'll say, did you all ever fight over the invitations for the wedding? And she'll roll her eyes. And he says, now wait a minute, that's not fair. I was a good fiance and I agreed to help you. And so I started doing all the invitations, and you looked at me and you said, why are you doing it that way? And it was the only way I knew. And I said, would have worked better. And she says, where did you learn to do that? And he says, this is what I've always thought. Would you please do it this way? Sure. And solves the problem without all. And what a lot of times happens, like in your workplace, if you're working with someone and you're teaching them something, and you look at somebody that's messing up and you say, why are you doing that? They don't know. They don't want to screw up at work. And so it makes them feel very embarrassed. And if anybody's watching, they're put off and they're really struggling. And then if you go at it like, where did you learn that? Oh, I had a previous job. Well, we found that this works better at our workplace. Can you try it this way? I'd love to try it that way. And then you bring them along where there's a building of trust, and the person feels a part of the team rather than being put away because they've done it the wrong way.
The thing about why questions too is it often implies a judgment that's negative. And it's not that you can never use why questions, but before you open your mouth to ask a why question, evaluate why, the reason behind it, and what you hope to accomplish. And that may change what you're about to say altogether.
The last thing I want to say about that is we are needs motivated. That's a really important thing to remember. So when you're working with your spouse, your kids, a coworker, and you remember that they're needs motivated, what you want to find out is what need do they think they're meeting by the activity that they're doing. And you can't find that out by asking, why are you doing it that way? You have to ask more questions to get more information. Okay. Any questions? Nobody asked why. That's good. The next one is a very interesting one, and this is, we call it love and respect. It's from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. Paul writes, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Did you see the shift there? Wives got to respect the husbands. Husbands got to love the wives. I read a book about a couple who were doing a retreat, something like this, and it would probably work out right here if we were to do this. If Martha were to take all the women to another room, and I was to take all the men to another room, and Martha was to ask all the women, which is more important to you, to be loved or respected? 90% of the women would say, oh, definitely to be loved. And the other 10% would say, well, showing me respect is loving me. So it would all be tied up. And then I would ask the men, which is more important to you, to be loved or respected? And 90% of the men would say, respect, duh. And 10% of the men would say, I want to be loved more. That's more important to me than that. So why, the question is, why did God wire us so different? It is a why question. Somebody give Dave a bonus. That's good. That's why, but God did wire us very different. And one of the things that I've found through the years are the things that are become my most important to me and that I can make the highest commitments to are the things that I have to work hardest at. And so it was easy for me to show respect for Martha through the years. That's what men want and share. And we know it when we're not respecting. But she needed me to make sure that she knew I loved her. That was not nearly as easy. I had to think about the words I use, the actions I make, the things that she sees me do, all those kinds of things. I needed to find out how I could show my love best. What kind of love language does she have? There's a book on the bibliography called The 5 Love Languages. Terrific book. It's my favorite book of all those on the bibliography. I'm not going to really go into any of them. It's just there for you. If you're a reader, it's a good list of books. And so the 5 love languages is really important. And I worked really hard so that Martha would know that I love her. Have you had to work at respect?
Yes. So that's one of those times when Al and I had to develop a word because I can disrespect him without ever meaning to. But how he perceives respect from me is not something that I grew up learning particularly. So it's not that I wanted to disrespect him, but I was. And so he had to teach me how to properly respect him and what were the boundaries and the parameters for that. And so that's been a give and take back and forth. And I'm still working on it. I don't always do it correct.
Driving the car.
Guilty.
All right. Any questions about, yeah.
So there's an excellent book. Actually titled Love and Respect.
Malcolm Eggridge. Malcolm Eggridge.
Yeah.
I didn't put it in here because it's
Great book for a couple of people.
halfway.
And
Well, the Bible study is great. And then he gets into some of his ideas about marriage. And Martha and I did not like any of it. The Bible study portion. So I didn't put it in here because I wasn't going to talk about it, but now you've talked about it. So if you look up Malcolm Eggridge's Love and Respect, that's the title of the book. Only read half of it. I'll save you the time. The first half is actually.
I will say too, that all the books, anytime you read a book, there's always going to be some really great stuff in it and some stuff you're probably going to disagree with, but that doesn't mean you throw out the whole thing.
Right.
Love and Respect had some really, really good points. But it had other stuff where like, no, don't think so. There's another book in the bibliography, The Great Sex Rescue, which talks about all the Christian books that have been written regarding sexual intimacy and everything that goes with that. And this Love and Respect book was not one that was well received. Parts of it are excellent, spot on. Other parts do damage actually to marriage. So always read books with an open mind and make sure that it lines up with what you actually believe. And if you have questions, ask a trusted friend or pastor.
Yeah. And the books we do have on the bibliography are all books almost all of them we've read. A couple of them have been recommended, we haven't gotten to yet. I just want to say a little bit more about the great sex rescue. It's the thing that a lot of couples don't talk about. Sexuality is a really important thing in marriage. And this book is a great conversation starter for what the husband and what the wife want to get out of their marriage in the sexual realm. This is all bonus. This is all free stuff here. And so it's written from the perspective of women, but there's a lot that men can learn from it. When my wife and I read books together, and when we read these kinds of books, we almost always do it together. We rarely do it apart. We'll read a section and say, what do you think? I don't think that's true. And we would work through those sections we agreed with, or we say, spot on. Let's try to integrate that into our marriage. One of the things that it's well documented that the divorce rate is very, very high in our country. At the same time, we have more great, fantastic resources to have the best marriages in the history of humankind than we can ever imagine. And yet most people do not avail themselves of that information. And so if you're having some hard spots in your marriage, you can ask me if I have any books to recommend, seek out some professional counseling. That's a mixed bag. Professional counselors, some of them are really, really good and some of them are really, really bad. But communication is a big part with your spouse and learning together, growing together. Just, I can't say enough about it. And so there you go. Yeah.
So another tool we want to talk about is something called take time out. I'm sure you all have been in a discussion that got rather heated from time to time. I have learned over the years that the best thing to do when I'm beginning to feel irritated, angry, maybe even afraid or sad, is I'll ask us to take a break. And I will go off by myself. And for me personally, because of my faith position, I usually spend some time in prayer, but I'm asking myself and God, why am I reacting to this? What is it that has gotten me really emotional about this, whatever the emotion may be? And God is so good to give me answers to that. And it can be with other people too, because I tend to be kind of an emotional person. And those timeouts with that help inform me of the real issue that I'm facing. While it's coming out in this discussion, it really may be based on something else. And so this timeout is also time just to step back without this discussion continuing to go around and around and around, to look at the discussion, to what you've talked about with your spouse, what you've come to, and just kind of analyze it from a calmer place and position. It gives you a chance to kind of calm down and reset. And the agreement is always that we will come back and discuss this again, maybe in an hour, maybe the next day when we've got plenty of time and we're not on any kind of time constraint, because with our lives that can happen. I think on your things. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Okay. You're talking about the fact that you and God have a successful discussion.
Most of the time.
Yeah. What happens when you don't? What should people do when they try what you said and it doesn't work?
Well, I also have I hadn't finished. Also, the other thing you could do is talk to a trusted friend, bounce the ideas off and have some, just another way of looking at it. For instance, this summer, we were working on a big deck. And Al had gotten to a point and he went ahead and did something on the deck that I wasn't especially pleased with. And I had very quality oriented. It wasn't the way I planned it. It wasn't what I thought. So I was not very happy. I would just say that. So in talking to it, he wasn't happy with me not being happy with his hard work. So I said, okay, so time out. So I pondered it for a while. I prayed about it. It's like, well, the stairs are really not that bad. We can figure this out. If we do this, this, and this, and that won't cause him too much extra work. So I came back around and I gave him my proposal. He still wasn't very happy, but I said, wait a second. I said, are you hearing me? A little effective listening. And he did. I said, well, do you see what I'm at? After we talked it out just a little bit more, after I'd had a time out to reassess and reevaluate and figure out something that would be acceptable to me and propose it to him, then he was fine with that. So, I mean, I didn't spend a lot of time with God, but you know, I knew enough about myself that if I have something in mind that I want to do in a certain way, if he does it different, then I'm going to have to adjust somehow, and adjusting works better away from him while I'm processing it.
Absolutely.
I've learned this over the years to go over and process and on my own and say, well, it's really not that big a deal. This will still work this way and that way. So that's one of the ways I do it. But, you know, I don't always hear from God, but I can tell you the times I've had that I have heard have been very profound because they've been informative of who I am. And knowing yourself, this is an opportunity in the midst of a difficult situation to get to know yourself better, to give yourselves permission to step apart for a bit and reevaluate and think. Because, you know, we have wounds from living life on this earth. And some of those wounds don't get healing as quickly as we might like, or we don't even know about sometimes. And so this is an opportunity to go, oh, yeah, this kind of reminds and reflects back to something that happened here. And that's why I'm really more lit up about it than I really should be. And just knowing that makes a huge difference because you can begin to heal that and you can also leave it out of the discussion altogether.
Okay, now, so there's just two of them there, right?
Normally.
Normally, yeah,
Normally. So you go apart, where do you go?
wherever I want, to my room, outside, take a walk, just depends.
A safe place.
You don't leave the house.
No,
Maybe.
not usually, but you know, sometimes I might take a walk down the street and walk the dogs or something, but normally I just go to another part of the house. I don't go that far away.
I
Because
left
we're
the
giving
house
each other
once.
space.
There was once when she was really wrong. And so,
Just once.
yeah. And so I said, I'm out of here. I threw my running shoes on and took off. And Martha and I have spent a lot of time learning how to listen to the voice of God when we pray. And I said, Lord, you got to fix her. She's a mess. And then I listened to hear what God was going to do to fix her. And God says, tell her you're sorry. I said, well, God, maybe you didn't hear me. I said that she was wrong and you got to fix her. She says, I know, you need to tell her you're sorry. And so I prayed and ran and prayed and ran and came home and said, hon, I'm really sorry for what I did in this mess. Da, 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 da. And she says, me too. It was over. It worked great. God intervened. I was in no state. That run wouldn't have fixed me. It was God. I was really sure I was right and she was wrong and she had to be penitent. And you know what? That wasn't ever going to work. Not at all. Not at all. Okay. We're running out of time, so I'm going to fly through the religious section of this, but I am going to quote my mom. Right before the first wedding I did, I officiated way back in 1982. I asked my mom, what do you think the key to marital success is? And she says, everybody I know that's happily married is active in their church. Martha and I agree with that. That's just, I'll let you all sift that through your own experiences of life. There's a picture there with God, husband and wife. That's the beginnings of what we call the marriage triangle. If you draw a line between God and the husband and the wife, and God and the wife, you have a marriage triangle. And the goal in the marriage triangle is, if you want to get closer to God, okay, if that's the triangle, you want to get closer to God at the top, then you get closer to your wife. Wives, you get closer to your husband if you want to get closer. And the triangle gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It's a very simple picture, but it's a very dramatic one. You want to get closer to your wife, get closer to God. You want to get closer to your husband, get closer to God. Make the triangle smaller. And the more time you spend with God, and the more time you spend with your spouse, the triangle gets smaller and the marriage gets better. Praying together, I found this story over and over and over again. Catholic Church did a study of 1,000 couples that prayed together, and 999 of them had a successful marriage. One got divorced. If counselors would take that seriously, we wouldn't have much divorce out there. Find a church home, like my mom said. Best marriages, if a couple's active in their church. And then I'm going to let Martha wrap this up.
So all these tools, while they're great, don't take this home and spring it on your spouse. go home and say something like, hey, a Rotary Day was really interesting, or not. And there's some interesting tools. Let's sit down and talk about and look through them and see if there's anything that we could use in our marriage to make a good marriage even better. So it's always good to talk things out, not just in the middle of something, spring it on them.
Very good.
Any questions? Very good. I'm going to do what I get asked to do every now and then, only this time instead of the food. I'm going to pray for your marriages. Dear Lord, we thank you for the gift of marriage and your plan for each of our lives to bring us together with the spouse that we've been with. I thank you for all those marriages that have lasted the decades, 50, even 60 years and more. I thank you for the great model they are in our lives, the chance we get to see people who have found a way to go through those hardest times in life and stay close and stay next to you. Lord, I pray for all the marriages that are represented here in our Rotary Club and those that are Rotarians who weren't able to be here today. Help us each one to find a way to make our marriage stronger, that we may enjoy your design and desire for marriage, that the two will become one. All to your glory we ask it. Amen.
And now we can.
Yeah, not stand. That's right. All right.